"I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle, ma'am." That sentence hit me harder than the blinding patrol light cutting through my windshield. I had just pulled into a legal parking spot off Gratiot Avenue in downtown Detroit, still wearing my courtroom heels and blazer, when Officer Darren Colt decided that a black woman behind the wheel of a late-model Lexus looked suspicious. I'm Alicia Monroe, a federal judge. But in that moment, I was just another black face behind tinted glass. He stood there, hand resting on the butt of his holstered weapon, eyes narrow, posture rigid. He hadn't run my plate. He hadn't asked for ID. He simply saw me, and something in his training, or maybe his bias, screamed, "That doesn't belong." "Is there a reason for this stop, officer?" I asked, keeping my voice firm but level, hands visible on the steering wheel. I've lectured prosecutors about constitutional overreach. I've thrown out entire cases on the basis of unlawful stops. I know the Fourth Amendment by heart. But none of that mattered here. Colt didn't flinch. "This vehicle was reported stolen," I blinked. "Excuse me?" I said. He repeated with a louder, colder edge. "This car is on our stolen vehicle list. Now step out, slowly." My breath slowed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout, "I'm a judge! I'm not a suspect." But I knew that raising my voice, even slightly, would only confirm his suspicion that I was hostile. That's the trap. Defend yourself too calmly, and you're hiding something. Push back too hard, and you're dangerous. I have registration in the glove compartment. My license is in my bag. I can out of the car. His voice didn't rise. It dropped. That low, lethal register cops use when they want to remind you that they control the moment, that they own the next 5 minutes of your life. So I moved, slowly, hands high. My court badge tucked deep in my purse, my dignity wrapped in silence. People were watching. Someone across the street had pulled out a phone. I saw it out of the corner of my eye as Colt cuffed me, hands behind my back, metal tight around my wrists. I tasted rage but swallowed it. The sidewalk didn't care that I had graduated top of my class at Yale Law, or that I ruled from the Eastern District bench every week. All they saw was a black woman in cuffs. All he saw was someone to contain. As I sat in the back of the squad car, windows rolled down just enough for humiliation to drift in with the breeze, I kept repeating to myself, "Tomorrow. Just wait until tomorrow, because tomorrow I'd be wearing my robe again. Not silk or velvet, but the kind that carries weight. Tomorrow, I'd be sitting high above the very courtroom where Officer Darren Colt might be required to testify. And when he walks through those doors and sees me, not in handcuffs, but in the seat of justice, it won't be revenge I offer, just the truth, delivered under oath." The next morning, the courtroom smelled of wood polish and restraint. I walked in early, my heels echoing across the marble floor like distant thunder. My robe hung heavy over my shoulders, not just from fabric, but from something deeper, from the weight of what had happened the night before. I had barely slept, not from fear, but from the memory of cold steel on my wrists and the burn of humiliation that doesn't wash off. I kept picturing his face, Officer Darren Colt, not out of spite, but because I knew what was coming. I had checked the docket myself. He was due to testify as a witness in a routine suppression hearing. Nothing dramatic. Until now. I sat behind the bench, spine tall, hands folded in front of me. The courtroom filled slowly. Clerks, attorneys, the public defender yawning behind her coffee. Then the door opened and he walked in. Blue uniform crisp. Badge polished. He didn't see me at first. He was focused on the prosecution table, casually reviewing notes. Then he looked up. I saw it. That split second of confusion. Then realization. And just like that, the color drained from his face. His mouth parted slightly, and for a brief moment, he forgot to breathe. He stared. I held his gaze. Not with contempt, not with smugness, just stillness. I wanted him to feel it, and not fear, but the friction of truth rubbing up against the version of reality he had assumed. He blinked, glanced away, then back again, like if he looked hard enough, I might disappear. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. I adjusted the microphone. "Good morning. We're here on People v. Martinez, motion to suppress. Officer Colt, you may take the stand." He hesitated before standing. His hands fumbled slightly with the oath. the same way mine had fumbled with the cold cuffs he'd slapped on me. He sat stiffly, shoulders squared, but voice tight. I asked my questions with perfect neutrality. No edge, no venom, just law. He answered carefully, like every word might trigger a tripwire. And maybe they did. When we finished, I turned to the attorneys. This court will take the matter under advisement. Adjourned. The gavel dropped, sharp and final. He stayed seated as the room cleared. His eyes found mine again, this time not with shock, but with something else. Maybe shame, maybe awe. I didn't move. I let the silence press down like a sentence. Only when the last person had exited did I speak. "Officer Colt," I said, my voice steady, "I trust next time you'll remember the difference between suspicion and assumption." He nodded. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I rose, gathered my files, and stepped down from the bench. My robe brushed past his shoulder as I walked by. No words, no revenge, just gravity, just justice. It would have been easier if it ended there. The courtroom, the silence, the weight of his realization. But stories like mine never end neatly. They linger. They spread like ink in water, darkening places you didn't expect. By noon the next day, word had gotten out. It started as a whisper among clerks, then a ripple through the courthouse halls, and by the following morning it had a headline. Federal judge detained in mistaken identity case. Harmless on the surface, sanitized, as if what happened to me was an administrative hiccup, not a violation, not an indictment of a broken instinct, but just a misstep, a blip. I read the article alone in my chambers, the photo cropped tight on my face, the story quoting a police spokesperson calling it regrettable, like spilled coffee or bad weather. No mention of the cuffs, no mention of the trembling hands that fastened them, no mention of how many times I said, "This is my car," before anyone listened. My clerk, Isaiah, knocked before entering. He was younger, sharp, and usually composed, but today his eyes searched mine a little too long. "Judge Monroe," he said gently, "are you okay?" I looked up. I wanted to say, "I'm fine." I wanted to keep everything tight, buttoned, unmoved. But instead I said, "I'm tired." He nodded, and for once words weren't needed. He understood. He was a black man in America, too. He didn't need details to know what it feels like to be seen as something you're not before you're ever allowed to be what you are. That afternoon, the police department issued a second statement. This one sounded more like a performance. "We take this matter seriously. We are reviewing our protocols." Review. Another word that means nothing until someone bleeds. I didn't respond. I didn't call the press. I didn't file a complaint. Not because I was afraid, but because I was already visible, and visibility is both shield and target. I could feel the tension building in the halls. Officers started avoiding eye contact when they passed me in security. One white prosecutor offered a nervous compliment on my grace under pressure, as if I'd just finished a ballet recital instead of being handcuffed on a street corner. That night, I sat by the window of my apartment, watching the streetlights stutter across the windshield of my Lexus parked below. It was the same car, same city, but I didn't feel the same. I felt split. One version of me still that judge on the bench, composed and sharp, and the other, the woman standing in a summer heat wave with cold steel on her wrists, humiliated for daring to exist with dignity. My phone buzzed. A message from a colleague, another judge, a white man I'd known for years. It read, "If there's anything I can do, let me know." I stared at the screen for a long moment before responding. Start believing that it happens, even when there's no headline. Then I turned off the light and let the darkness settle around me, not as fear, but as truth. Because what happened wasn't a mistake. It was a mirror. And now that it had cracked, I wasn't sure who still wanted to look into it. The summons came quietly. A sealed envelope left on my desk marked Internal Affairs Inquiry. Not as a subject, they claimed, but as a witness. "Your cooperation is appreciated," it read, tucked beneath a veiled apology and a line about maintaining institutional integrity. I read it twice, folded it neatly, and placed it back in the envelope. Then I left it there, untouched for 2 days. When I finally walked into the precinct's internal review office, it wasn't nerves I carried. It was memory. The carpet smelled of ammonia and forgotten anger. The room was cold, sterile, too bright. A young investigator with round glasses and a nervous smile introduced himself as Agent Mercer. "Judge Monroe, thank you for being here," he said, like I'd been invited to tea. He asked for a recounting of the incident, the stop, the arrest, the interaction. I gave him facts, just facts. No color, no commentary. He scribbled notes but didn't look up. Then he asked the question they always ask when they want you to excuse someone's bad judgment. "Do you believe Officer Colt intended to target you personally?" I paused, then said, "He didn't know who I was. He just thought he knew what I wasn't." Mercer didn't respond, just underlined something in his notebook and said the review would take several weeks. I nodded. I knew what that meant. Time for attention to fade, for headlines to flatten, for the system to correct itself just enough to remain unchanged. I stood, shook his hand, and walked out into a light rain. That evening, the city council called a special meeting. Civil rights advocates had gotten involved. The NAACP released a statement. The mayor promised retraining efforts, all the usual choreography. On the news, they showed footage of protesters holding signs outside the precinct, some with my name, others with words like respect, dignity, and justice. I watched silently, arms crossed, sitting in the same robe-still-hung chair I always returned to after court. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired. Because now my name had become a banner, and banners, once lifted, are easier to wave than to protect. The next day, Officer Colt requested a private meeting. I declined. Then he requested again informally through my clerk. I considered ignoring it, but something told me I needed to hear what silence wouldn't say. So we met, in a neutral room, no cameras, no court seal. Just 2 chairs, a table, and the space between. He looked different without the uniform, smaller somehow. His voice, when he finally spoke, was softer than I remembered. "Judge Monroe," he began. I didn't know. I let him talk. He said he'd seen the video. Said he'd read the news. Said he had a daughter in college who looked like me. Then he said it. The thing people say when they've run out of defenses. I was just doing my job. I leaned forward. "No, Officer Colt. You were doing what you've been taught to do. What you've been allowed to do." He didn't argue. He just nodded, not in agreement, but in recognition. Like someone finally hearing the echo of a sound he'd ignored for years. When he left, he didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't offer it, because this wasn't about closure. It was about clarity, about looking power in the eye and letting it feel the discomfort of being seen. That night, I returned to my courtroom, alone, and sat in the judge's chair without a robe. Just me, no gavel, no formality. I closed my eyes and let the silence surround me. Not the silence of compliance, but the silence that comes after truth has been spoken, and the room is still deciding what to do with it. I opened my eyes and whispered to the emptiness, "This isn't justice yet, but it's a beginning." And then I went home. They started stopping me on the street. Not the police this time, but people, strangers, neighbors I'd never noticed before. A woman outside the grocery store touched my arm and said, "Thank you for standing tall." A law student at the courthouse passed me a folded note. "You made me believe I can belong here." They meant well. Their eyes were kind. But each thank you pressed deeper into a place I wasn't sure was healed yet. I hadn't asked to become a symbol. I hadn't wanted my restraint to be repackaged as bravery. I'd simply survived a moment that should have never happened. Still, I began to notice it, the quiet shift. In conversations, in posture, in the way certain officers lowered their voices around me now, not out of guilt, out of caution. As if I'd become radioactive, or worse, unpredictable. I'd never raised my voice on the bench, never handed down a ruling from spite. But now they looked at me not as a colleague, but as a reckoning. One morning, I arrived at the courthouse early. The hallways were still echoing with the sound of janitors' wheels and the scent of fresh polish. On my desk was a sealed envelope, anonymous. Inside, a photo, grainy, printed from a phone. It showed me, handcuffed, leaning against the squad car, eyes forward, No blood, no bruises, just me, frozen in humiliation. On the back, a single line scribbled in blue ink. "Power doesn't look like you." I stared at it for a long time. Not out of fear, but because of how deeply familiar it felt. That phrase, whether spoken or implied, had been following me since law school. Since the first time I was asked, "Are you the court reporter?" instead of the attorney. Since my first judicial appointment, when someone in the gallery whispered, "She doesn't look like a judge." I didn't bring the photo to security. I didn't file a report. I placed it in my drawer not out of cowardice, but as evidence, not for the police, but for myself. A reminder of how fragile their perception of power is when it sits inside someone they didn't expect. That evening, I received an invitation to speak. A university's law department was holding a forum on civil liberties and systemic reform. They wanted me to share my experience. That word again. Experience. As if I'd gone on a trip. As if my trauma was now a curriculum. I considered declining. But something in me, perhaps the part still clenching from that metal bracelet, said yes. When I stood before that room of students, some wide-eyed, some skeptical, I didn't rehearse. I didn't soften. I told them what happened. Not just the stop, not just the cuffs, but the aftermath, the silence, the sideways glances, the realization that power, even when worn rightfully, must still prove itself again and again when it wears a black face. I ended with this. I wasn't angry that day because I was arrested. I was angry because even now, after all my degrees, my title, my robe, I knew that if there hadn't been a camera, my truth might not have mattered. They applauded. Some stood. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exposed. Because I knew tomorrow I'd return to the same courtroom with the same bench and the same eyes watching, some hoping I'd stumble, others waiting for me to rise, and I would. Not out of pride, but because I had no other choice. Time has a strange way of smoothing over discomfort without ever really healing it. After the photo, after the speech, after the attention faded into the next controversy, life resumed, or pretended to. My docket filled again. My calendar returned to its rhythm. Hearings, motions, verdicts. The things I once found purpose in now felt slightly hollow, like echoes of a voice I no longer fully recognized. People still greeted me with respect. Colleagues nodded in elevators. But there was a new layer beneath every interaction. A quiet recalibration of how they saw me. I was no longer just Judge Monroe. I had become the woman who made the city flinch. City Hall launched a formal review process. Committees were formed, filled with people in suits saying all the right words, bias training, policy realignment, community review boards. Meetings were held. Recommendations drafted. A few changes even passed. But I'd sat through enough procedural reforms to know systems know how to change their language without changing their structure. One afternoon, I received a call from a reporter I trusted. She wanted to do a longer piece, not on the incident, but on the aftermath. On what happens when justice brushes against injustice and the world expects closure. I told her no, not because I didn't have more to say, but because I was tired of being asked to reopen the wound for public inspection. Pain isn't performance, and healing doesn't happen under spotlights. Still, the story wouldn't let me go. Some nights I'd wake up without knowing why. Heart steady, breath calm, but mind alert, as if my body still remembered the threat even after it passed. I kept the photo in my drawer. I never looked at it, but I never threw it away either. Then came the letter, neatly typed, unsigned, postmarked 2 towns over. It read, "I used to believe the robe meant something sacred. Watching what they did to you, it broke that belief. But seeing you still walk into that courtroom, that made me believe again." I folded the page once, then again, and placed it inside my pocket, not as validation, but as reminder that someone out there was still watching. Not for my pain, but for my persistence. The next day, I stepped back into court for a particularly complex sentencing. A young man, 21, first offense, non-violent, facing a mandatory minimum. The prosecution was firm. The law was clear, but the letter weighed in my chest like a second heartbeat. When I delivered my ruling, I spoke slower than usual, every word deliberate. Every pause, a silent rebellion against routine. And when I looked into the defendant's eyes, I didn't see threat. I saw a system that expected me to look away. After court, as I removed my robe, I realized something had shifted, not in them, but in me. I was no longer performing neutrality. I was shaping it, redefining it. My silence in that moment with Colt had never been weakness. It had been control. My restraint, my poise, my refusal to descend into anger, they were choices, and they were mine. Justice, I've learned, doesn't live in headlines or court transcripts. It lives in the decisions we make when no one's clapping, when the cameras are gone, when the room is still, and sometimes it lives in the choice to keep showing up, even when the robe feels heavier than usual. Even when you know the system is still learning how to see you. A year later, the city looked the same, but I didn't walk through it the same way. The streets I once rushed through now made me pause. The faces I passed, more of them nodded, smiled, some even said my name. But the real difference wasn't how they saw me. It was how I'd learned to carry what happened without letting it own me. One morning, I was invited to speak at a police academy graduation. The request surprised me. I almost declined. Part of me thought, is this a gesture, a box they want checked? But another part whispered, maybe this is where it begins. Not in courtrooms, not in op-eds, but in the rooms where they first learn what power looks like. So I went. The room was quiet when I walked in. Rows of fresh uniforms, faces young and mostly cautious. I could see them wondering, what would she say? Would she scold us? Would she bring it up? I waited a long breath before I spoke. I know what some of you are thinking, I began. You heard about what happened. You've seen the footage. You might be wondering what kind of judge agrees to stand in front of the very system that once put her in cuffs. A pause, eyes fixed. I'm here because I believe in accountability, not just for you, but for me too. For all of us who serve in systems built by people, shaped by assumptions, haunted by history. I don't need you to be perfect. I need you to be honest. To ask yourself every day, who do I see when I look into that window? A threat or a person? When I finished, they clapped. Not loudly, not out of obligation. It was thoughtful, and that was enough. Afterward, a young recruit, black, maybe 20, walked up to me. He looked nervous. Judge Monroe, he said, voice quiet. When they cuffed you, what did you feel? I thought for a moment. Truthfully, I said, I felt invisible. Not as a judge, not even as a woman, just invisible. He nodded, then said, I'll try to make sure no one ever feels that way again. And in that moment, I believed him. Later that evening, I returned home, sat in my chair by the window, and looked out over the city. Lights flickered. Sirens hummed somewhere far off. I closed my eyes and breathed. It wasn't justice yet, but it was motion. The photo, the one they sent me anonymously, still sat in my drawer. I took it out one last time, looked at the woman in the image, composed, restrained, wounded but unbroken. Then I flipped it over. The words were still there. Power doesn't look like you. I reached for a pen, and just beneath it, I wrote, it does now. Then I tucked it back, not as evidence, but as closure, and turned toward the next day, robe ready, spine tall, door still open.